Hey book friends, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to my November wrap up where I talk about all the books I read in November, which I would have to say was a pretty good month. I am getting back into historical fiction. It was the month of Historathon. So stay tuned for all the books, 5 books in specific, that I read in November. So hi, my name is Angie. Welcome to the channel if you're new here, or welcome back if you have been coming for a while. So like I said, we're going to chat through the books I read, some opinions I have about them, some opinions that might differ from a lot of other people's opinions about them. So let's just hop in. Let's hop into my thoughts on the books I read. So like I said, I read 5 books. One of them was a DNF. I'll call it a soft DNF. And then 2 of them were 3 stars, 1 4-star, and 1 5-star. So let's just go in the order I read them. I never know how to start these. I'll go in the order I read them. So to start with, The Witch Haven by Sasha Payton Smith. And so this is a YA historical fantasy type book that I thought sounded so good. And I really did enjoy it. It just disappointed me in some ways. And so this is about a girl named Frances, in turn of the century New York City, who is having a hard time. Her brother went missing. Her mother was hospitalized with like a mental breakdown after her brother went missing, and she is kind of fending for herself. She works at a seamstress, and it's pretty terrible working conditions, especially one night when she is attacked by her boss, and she unexpectedly defends herself using magic, and she thinks she's going to be going to jail. But instead, there are these 2 women who show up on her doorstep to escort her to like this tuberculosis sanatorium of sorts, which turns out to be a magic school for witches, where she learns about her gifts and powers. She also meets this boy who also is a wizard, I don't know. And they form this friendship and things start happening. And really liked the premise of this book. I felt like it could have gone so well. What I just didn't love is I didn't love the giant conveniences that had to happen in order for the characters to kind of get where they needed to go. I just felt like it was a little too convenient. I felt like I liked the friendships between the girls. That was probably my favorite part, as well as like this budding romance type thing between the main character and this boy. But that part is probably what upset me the most. And I'm not going to say any more there. I'm just going to let that be in case you want to read this, because it really was fun. It was a fun book. I just felt like it could have been better. And I realized that maybe that's because I'm not the target audience, or I wanted it to have more of an adult feel than it had. And it doesn't. It is a YA book. And I feel like that sometimes puts me off. And so then I try to be like, well, if I was 17, would I have enjoyed this? Probably a lot more. I don't know. I thought I was going to pick up the second one, but I don't think I will. So that's The Witch Haven. 3 stars, like I said. As for what I read next was my other 3 stars. So this is the first book I read for Historathon. Even though this was technically historical fiction, it just wasn't on my Historathon TBR, although I probably should have tried to put it on there. But here's one of the books I read for Historathon, which is Luck of the Titanic by Stacey Lee. So this is another example, I think, of where I was expecting it to go different places and it didn't go there. And again, it was because it's YA and I didn't know it was YA. I think if I knew that, I would have had a different experience with this book, because there were so many things I really liked about it. So it's about this half Chinese woman who lives in England, who grew up in England, but it's turn of the century and she is trying to track down her twin brother. And so there's some sibling interactions and conflicts that I actually really did like. I liked the sibling aspect of this book, but he is on the Titanic, or she knew he was on the Titanic, so she is attempting to get on there. There's some problems because of what was called the Chinese Exclusion Act, which kept Chinese individuals out of America during that time frame, so the early 1900s. And so she has problems getting on the Titanic, and so she has to find ways to get on there. And that was pretty entertaining. And then from there, she has to convince her brother of what she wants. And some other things happen to kind of keep her from being discovered as like a stowaway, right? And I didn't mind those things. I felt like the stakes probably should have been a little bit higher based on what she was doing and how she was going about trying to blend in, but I still enjoyed it. I enjoyed the story. And then I knew the accident of the Titanic was coming. You knew they were going to hit an iceberg. And so you're kind of waiting for it. Like I knew a little bit of the history, enough to know about what day they were going to be hitting the iceberg. And so I was waiting for that. And I like that in books. That's probably was one of my favorite parts of this book, which is probably why this is more of a 3.5 than a 3-star, is the anticipation of that coming, that historical event, and what would happen. Like, how did she survive? Did the people she know or her friends survive? Like, I really enjoyed that. What this did, though, was it made me want to read more books about the Titanic, more historical fiction about the Titanic, which I mentioned in one of my recent videos. And so I got a lot of good recommendations from you all. So thank you for that. And so I think I'll pursue that a little bit more and try and find some good historical fiction about it. This was pretty good. I just think I need an adult historical fiction about the Titanic. So 3.5 stars. And then what I picked up next, and I loved, I did not expect to like this book this much, was The Ruin of Kings by Jen Lyons. I gave it 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I feel like what it was for me is I was anticipating this being a little bit more of a setup book or a little confusing based on what I've heard from other people on BookTube. And it was to some extent, but it wasn't in a lot of other ways. I thought it was really entertaining, really fast paced. And then there was some slower kind of character development times, like training and different things like that. But I really enjoyed that. So this is about this boy at the beginning, named Kieran, who starts the book off in jail. And he is held captive by this other person / monster that he knows. And she asks him to start telling a story, to tell his story. And he really doesn't want to, but then he just starts telling it. And she like cuts him off and she's like, oh no, that's not good enough. We need to start earlier. And so she knows his story earlier on. So she starts telling his story as he's telling his story. And they're kind of a year or two apart. And then by the end, the timelines mesh and you kind of get the full picture. But I really like that because the backstory really helped understand the story that Kieran was telling about his life and what was happening. And I just found it all so fascinating. I loved the magic system and the intrigue and all of the situations he got put in. And I just really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the trope of like, he seems like he's going to be the savior of the world, right? There's this like terrible overlord and he is like oppressing the people sort of situation. And Kieran seems to be maybe like he is going to help that. But as you go through it, you're like questioning, well, maybe not. And how's he going to do this? Some of the things were a bit confusing, not in the timeline, but in the people involved, like the different like families and people. And I don't want to give away too much because some of that would definitely be a spoiler. And I also want to caution you from looking too much in the back because the back has a glossary, which is helpful. I always do like when fantasy books have glossaries, but it also has like a family tree, which is really good. But don't look at it till the end. I feel like you'll spoil some reveals that are very entertaining. I just wanted to let you know that in case you're looking to read this, because this is a 5-book series, if I'm not mistaken, called The Chorus of Dragons. And this is just the first. And honestly, I was thinking I was going to like it, but I didn't really realize I was going to love it so much. I felt like she did an excellent job of the character work. Like, I really liked Kieran. I liked a lot of the other characters around him. I thought it was really interesting how it was like, who do you trust? Like, who is this person? And I just don't want to say too much, but I really enjoyed it. So if you're looking for kind of a big fantasy series, I highly recommend this one. I feel like I follow a number of people on BookTube who liked this first one and then started not to like it. But then I watched a Should You Read video by Angela from Literature Science Alliance, and that helped me like realize kind of the bigger breadth of the series. And so I really like that. It kind of set me up to enjoy this book more because not that I know what's going to happen, but I kind of have a general sense of how the books are set up to get to the end, if that makes sense. Hopefully. But I really liked it. I wasn't expecting to like it, and I'm like, oh no, I just started another huge fantasy series. I feel like 2022 has just been the year of learning or relearning that I like fantasy series. Okay, so the next book I picked up, I read the first chapter. I talked about it in my Friday reads. It's the group book for Historathon called The Lost Girls of Willowbrook by Ellen Marie Wiseman. I really want to read one of her books, but it might not be this one. So once I got into it and just the feeling of the main character, and like I was talking about in my Friday reads, like Chantel mentioned the fact that it's very gritty historical fiction, which is a word I look for because I don't typically like gritty books. And the synopsis is about this girl who lost her twin sister like when she was 10, and now the main character, Sage, I think, is like 17 or something like that. She learns that her twin sister didn't actually die, but she was put into this institute called Willowbrook, and her stepfather says she's just fine. But she learns that her twin, Rosemary, is missing. And so she goes to figure out what is going on with this institute. And I've heard the institute is just terrible, like terrible living conditions, and also maybe psychologically damaging in some way. And so this girl, this main character, I feel like was already a little bit damaged. I don't know if that's the right word, but she had a lot of issues. And I felt like, so you already have a main character who's like that, and then you put her in what sounds like a very horrendous situation. And I just didn't feel like I was in the right headspace to feel all of that, if that makes sense. So this is a soft DNF. This is not a DNF like I'll never pick it up again. I'm in a season where I can't handle too gritty or too real type books, which is why I've been a bit slumpy in my historical fiction lately. And I just had to put this one down. And a lot of you actually helped me with that, so thank you. Because like I said in that Friday reads, I just wasn't sure. I was back and forth, and you guys commented and just helped me decide that this is just not the right time for that book. So that was a DNF. I might pick it up again. I'm keeping it on my shelves. I just need to be in a different headspace for it because I've heard it's good. So anyway, I'm done talking about that. On to the last book I read. Okay, this book. I have so many thoughts and feelings about this book. It was really good. The subject matter was fascinating. How did the author pull it off? Pretty good. So let me get into that. So I would say in the end, I'm going to give this 4 stars. I really liked it. There's some aspects of it I wish were a little bit different, and I will explain that in just a second. But this book is called The Women of Chateau, Lafayette by Stephanie Dray. All right, so this book is about a castle, basically in France, and 3 time frames that we follow different women at that castle. The first time frame is like in the 1770s around the French Revolution. The next time frame is World War I, and then the third time frame is World War II. The basic premise is that there are these strong women who lead this castle that really help the people, and there's different situations, and I really enjoyed that. And that first timeline was around French Revolution, and one of the main characters in that time frame was the Marquis de Lafayette. So that was the man who was a big part of the American Revolution as well as the French Revolution, and he just was a person who embodied a lot of ideas of freedom and liberty, and he went to America to help out, and then he was able to bring France into the American Revolution. I think that was probably my favorite part because my kids and I were studying American history last year, so we learned about Lafayette, but it was just kind of in passing, and he made such a difference in the war, and so it was just so interesting to hear it from his side, but it wasn't totally his perspective. It was his wife's, Adrian's, perspective, and she was a fascinating character, just very strong. There was some struggles and things like that, but she was just kind of the support behind the figure of Lafayette. She held his same ideals. She pushed him into greatness. So I loved that time frame. The other 2 time frames weren't as much my favorites. I think it was just more the people. And so the second time frame was about this woman named Beatrice, who also was a real person. She was an American who was back and forth to France for various reasons, eventually ended up purchasing Lafayette's castle and setting it up as an orphanage for a lot of Jewish kids or just kids, sick kids during the time of World War I. And I found it very fascinating, her perspective. I didn't love her character. I felt bogged down a little bit by her storyline. And the same with the third storyline, which was based on a girl who grew up at this sanatorium in the castle and who is now enduring World War II, wrestling with different things like how do they get involved or not involved and things like that. I didn't love her character, but I saw the reason the author used that third perspective as kind of like an orphan that Beatrice, that second perspective, really took under her wing, and she grew up in this orphanage, in this castle. And throughout all three timelines is this idea of strength and fighting for liberty and fighting for freedom. And I just really loved the fact that it was focused on the women, especially the wife of Lafayette. I thought that was just really neat. And you could see the history was woven through all three timelines. And so I loved it. I really learned a lot. I did a lot of historical deep diving and research into Lafayette and that time frame. But I would say the part I struggled most with was kind of the middle. I felt like it started off so well and it ended so well. The middle I felt just was a little bloated. Like it just had too much. Like I didn't need it to be a 550 page book. It could have been 450 pages and I still would have felt all the feelings and been attached to the characters. I just felt like it was just a little long, and then it took me a while to get through. I stopped wanting to pick it up, which is always a sign for me that it's getting a little bit boring. Even though I'm a like character driven reader, it just kind of lost me there in the middle. But I got it back in the end and it ended really well, very entertaining. I highly recommend it, especially if you are interested in the figure of Lafayette, interested in kind of his life. Honestly, I just wish it was just about him. I think that would have been better, but it was still a very good book. So that is my wrap up. Those are the 5 books I read in November. That's a pretty standard book reading month for me. I typically read about 4 to 5 books a month, but let me know down below your thoughts on any of these books. Have you read them? Did you end up picking up The Lost Girls of Willowbrook for Historathon if you participated in that? And otherwise, that's what I have. Like the video if you liked it and subscribe to the channel if you want to. And I will see you in the next book video. All right, guys, take care. Bye.